it is now revealed that on 2 previous occasions you have been found guilty of political violence. On both those occasions you claim the charges were brought falsely against you. Can you now really expect us to believe that for a 3rd time you are the victim of false accusation?
That's for the jury to decide.
Yes. Let us come back again, Mr. Dowd, to strikes which you say you enjoy. To one specific strike, the subject of this charge. Now,
I didn't say I enjoyed strikes.
You most certainly did. I have your words. I've enjoyed a couple. I asked, do you enjoy strikes? And you replied, I've enjoyed a couple.
I said I've enjoyed a couple. There's a difference.
Is there? And was this one of the strikes that you enjoyed?
No.
You've admitted as straightforwardly as you seem to be able to admit anything, telling the 3 pickets to go and lie down in the road.
No, I wouldn't presume to tell...
You've admitted shouting abuse and trying to open the door to get at the driver.
Yes.
Yes, you harassed him through the broken windscreen.
Not harassed.
And now why balk at admitting that you climbed upon the van?
I didn't.
Well, the police evidence says that you did, and we also have the evidence of the van driver himself. It's logical that you would, isn't it? You addressed him through the broken windscreen. The van was surrounded by men. What more likely that you would climb onto the bonnet in order to be near enough for him to hear you?
If I had climbed on the bonnet, he might have thought I was trying to get at him, intimidate him. But I didn't, and I wasn't. I was going to get the camera.
Shouted and threatened him?
No, the windows were shut.
You knew the strike was running down, was nearly over, in fact, when you began to attend it, didn't you?
Yes.
You went along as what we have heard called a political stiffener, didn't you?
Yes.
And you think policemen are all fascist pigs?
Some of them are.
Am I a fascist pig?
I don't know you well enough to tell.
Not as well as you are acquainted with some policemen,
Correct.
Tell me, Mr. Dowd, are old-age pensioners fascist pigs?
Now, what sort of question's that?
Well, most strikes are for more money, aren't they?
Most, yes.
More money for old-age pensioners?
Unfortunately not, if they could be organised.
So if one organised section of the community is able to strike for more and more money, what happens to the value of money? To the value of the pound notes in the old man's pension? To the value of the pound notes of all those fixed incomes? To the value of the pound notes that the rest of us not able to strike have to live on? They're worth less and less, aren't they? The only possible result is inflation, is it not?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Certainly it's not. There's nothing rhetorical about inflation, is there?
Inflation is caused, in fact, is only possible because governments print more pound notes.
Oh, you know that's nonsense, don't you?
It's true. For years now, governments have been printing more and more pound notes with a wave of their magic wands as if money's gone out of fashion.
More and more money has to be issued to pay these men who are blackmailing the rest of us.
More and more money has to be issued because successive governments have spent crazy amounts on such suicidal pipe dreams as the independent nuclear deterrent to uphold this rotten, greedy system of theirs.
Oh, so you're an expert economist too, are you?
I am studying it.
Are you, like so many economists, hopeless at managing your own money?
I manage.
Manage very well?
Look, Cock, my underwear's 5 years old.
It must be getting small for you.
And my mum's ashamed of me.
I don't doubt that.
Mr. Logan.
My lord. You're moving into a new flat. You travel, stay in hotels, fly north for a TV show, south for a prestigious strike, north, south, east and west. All this for a student on a tiny grant. You don't answer.
Well, I'm glad to say student grants are tiny. They're ridiculous.
But are we permitted to ask you, Mr. Dowd, how you do manage? How can you afford this Crown Court trial, for example? Solicitors, barristers, a judge?
I'm deeply shocked to learn I have to pay his lordship.
Court costs which you could have avoided, all of which could cost you many hundreds of pounds. How do you pay for it?
Look, Cock, think about it. I'm a bloody nuisance to the establishment. They've had taxmen, even the fraud squad, onto me. If there's anything shady about my few pennies, don't you think that's why I'd be up in court about, not this trumped-up charge?
Yes, all this aside, Mr. Dowd, how do you pay for it?
You really are trying to make me look glamorous, aren't you? I live in one room. I seldom jet about the world. If I have to get somewhere, I find a way, that's all.
And the costs of this, some might say, unnecessary trial?
And I don't know who's paying you, but my lawyers are working for nothing, God bless them. Anything else? Well, there's a magazine I sometimes write for. That started a defence fund for me. And there's the odd collection at meetings and so on. You see, I don't know how I'll manage, but I will. Of course, I do agree with you. Justice shouldn't only be for rich men.
Mr. Dowd, did you receive the sum of £400 in June last year from the United World Society, Incorporated?
You really do your homework, don't you? Yes. Just over 400.
And are you aware that this organization has been branded as a communist front organization by the American government?
Look, Senator Witch-Hunting McCarthy, I don't care who gives me money. I'd even take money from you. But nobody has ever told me what to spend it on. Nobody.
You think you have a smart answer for everything, don't you?
No, I don't know all the answers, and I never will. I don't know why people like you settle for certainty. I don't know why 2/3 of the world are starving while we're fat. I don't know.
No, you don't know, but you'll go on shouting at van drivers, shouting on television, shouting in courts, shouting in the press until we all know about you. Communist finance.
I'm capitalist.
An anarchist.
That only means I take responsibility for myself.
And for everybody else. Or what else were you doing at these strikes anyway?
Lending my support.
Violent if needs be.
No.
Yes, and meanwhile, how much longer do you think the British public are going to allow violent, self-confessed anarchists like you to stir up highly inflationary strikes and hold the rest of us to ransom?
As long as the majority of the British public are underpaid.
Thank you, Donald Dowd.
And underprivileged and being robbed of their rights.
No re-examination, my lord.
You have a simple choice, members of the jury, of whom to believe. Which is why we were forced to spend so long on what cannot have been very interesting for you, on examining the character and beliefs of this extraordinary young man. You will have formed your own opinion of him. Arrogant, insolent, many times rebuked with neither dignity nor respect for the ideals and standards of the rest of us. He has admitted without a trace of shame things which personally you might feel to be quite shocking. An anarchist, a man who enjoys disrupting industry, communist financed, an opportunist who the Crown contends would stop at very little to achieve his own ends. He has pleaded not guilty to the charge of intimidation, but from all you have heard, you may well consider him to be lying. On his own admission, he has in the past been convicted on 2 similar charges, and on this occasion, with the evidence of not 1 but 2 reputable witnesses, I submit you have no choice but to find Donald Dowd guilty as charged.
And as we have seen, both Barrett and Sergeant Kershaw have shown their intense personal dislike of his political views and actions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this reaction, this fear of disturbing the status quo is not unique to here and now. All through history there have been men who refused to conform, who doubted and questioned, and thus goaded others into new and better ways of doing things. Oh, they're not easy people to have around. Establishments have always hated and persecuted them, but they are essential. Without them, there'd be no real progress, no social change, and very little justice. Now, Dr. Elwes, his tutor, a scholar and academic of considerable stature, has said Dowd is an outstanding student of whom she has a high opinion. A man who will not tolerate any hypocrisy. A man who, even at the cost of seeming unlikable, insists upon the truth. The whole painful truth. Now, I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that he has been telling us the truth here. Of course he intimidated no one. What would he stand to gain from intimidation? Would intimidation help his political cause? No, ladies and gentlemen, the case against him has not been proven. I suggest you have no alternative but to find Donald Dowd not guilty.
Now, members of the jury, it is for you to decide the facts, but as to the law, you must be guided by me. Now, the accused is charged with intimidation, which means a threat of violence. You'll recall what the van driver told you, how his van was attacked and the windscreen broken. You may think, though it is a matter for you, that if all that he told you is true, then he was indeed threatened with violence. You will recall his evidence of the defendant's part in those events. You will recall that the police officer told you that he arrested Dowd half on the van. Now, you may think that if their evidence is true, that the defendant was guilty of intimidation. But was it true? The defendant says that he moved away from the van before all that happened, that he went to get his camera. He suggests that the van driver and the police officer are lying. And he says their motives are that the van driver had an antipathy towards him and everything he thought, and the police officer, who had come across the defendant before, regarded him as a troublesome stiffener who prolongs strikes. Well, it is a matter for you. Who do you believe? It is your duty, difficult though it may be, to view the evidence dispassionately and without prejudice. If the beliefs of the witnesses or the accused appeal to you or antagonize you, try to put them out of your mind. Try to view the evidence objectively. And remember that the prosecution must prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. So if there is reasonable doubt that the defendant was guilty of any intimidation, then you must return your verdict accordingly. Now, members of the jury, will you kindly retire to consider your verdict?
All stand. All stand.
Members of the jury, who shall speak as your foreman?
I shall.
Are you agreed upon a verdict?
Yes, we are.
On the charge of intimidation, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
This has been a political trial, and I've been found guilty of my beliefs.
Be silent, Dowd. You may sit while we hear details of your antecedents.
Donald Dowd is found guilty of intimidation and sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. Next week, our cameras return to watch another leading case in the Crown Court.